Here I had a little bit of a headline. It's got to do with China. Okay, and China's a big deal, and especially in the world stage today. And the way I look at it, China is not going to become the next empire. The United States will be the last empire. That's how close we are to extinction. And so yeah, I look at China very closely because I think it's the last major region of the world that needs to develop economically. Once it does reach that plateau, then I think that's also a stopping point for humanity. I think that's where humanity somewhat ends, when the United States does not grow anymore and China also reaches some kind of plateau. And I don't think there's much more time after that. Okay, so here's China. Says US and EU, the European Union, agree to work on chip supplies, tech rules, China trade. They're all worried about China. And it says the statement in the body of this article says the statement did not mention China, but said we stand together in continuing to protect our businesses, consumers, and workers from unfair trade practices. They want to contain who? China. In particular, those posed by non-market economies, or economics, or the economies. I said it right the first time. Why? Because they say that China's not playing fair ball, that are undermining the world trading system. So these countries are a little worried about China, and this is sponsored. These meetings are sponsored by the United States because the United States is not growing, or not growing fast enough, while China is still growing. And that's a worry for a lot of people, especially in the United States government. They're worried about this China rising and catching up, and what are we going to do about it? And so they look for ways to stop China, and one of those is to say, oh, you're cheating, you're doing this, you're subsidizing your private companies, and competing on the world stage with companies like ours, which are not subsidized, that sort of thing. And so some of it seems to be nitpicking, because I think every country in the world subsidizes to some degree some industry in its country. United States for sure subsidizes many agricultural products, for example, to keep their farmers, going. Sometimes it buys from those farmers when the world market collapses or whatever, so that the farmers can continue rolling until next year, and so on. So every country essentially subsidizes. And I think that's more or less what the Chinese throw back at the United States and at the Western Europe. But yeah, right now there's these two worlds. Okay, we have the world of China and its allies on its side, and the United States and its allies on its side. And the question is whether that's going to reach some special climax. Okay. Fellow asks in relation to that, says, I guess China's on a lot of people's minds. What are your thoughts on the Russian-Chinese military drills, just in case America decides to keep going imperialistic around the South China Seas? Okay, I personally think that there won't be a war. We are essentially in a Cold War too. Okay, no way America is moralized to fight another war if it keeps losing the third world to third world countries like Vietnam and Afghanistan so frequently. It's not that they lost. America lost in Afghanistan. A lot of it has to do with, how much are you willing to invest and what are you going to get out of it? How strategic is Afghanistan? And when they do their calculations, they say, look, it's not worth it. Especially when you have Russia and China, which take advantage of that. Say, oh, let's compel the Americans to spend lots of money, lots of energy, lots of, resources on fighting these barefooted hillbillies from Afghanistan. And they spend all this money, to fight them, and we can keep that going as far as the Americans want. So that's what it's all about. So it's a question of resources. And I think the United States has opted for abandoning Afghanistan and taking some of those resources and taking them farther east, where they think they have a more important situation. Okay? I think that's what's happening. And likewise, I think that I mentioned in the past that they've abandoned Saudi Arabia. So it's like the United States is moving its pawns on the chess game over to the east, taking its resources farther east. I think that's what it's all about. So it's not like they lost against the Afghanistanis. I'm sure the United States could have done a lot more there, but they just said it's not worth it. Even if we bomb them to smithereens, what are we going to get? Nothing. So it's a question is what you get out of it, what you put in, what you get out. Okay? And so I just want to point out also what this dichotomy is about, this fight between the East and the West, okay? And here's a little picture that summarizes this more or less. Okay, you have China, which is really a union. It's got a single government, okay? Whereas this alliance, I'll call it the Confederation, involves United States, European Union, United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, primarily the English-speaking countries. That's why I put the European Union in purple there, because we don't really know if all those countries are reliable as allies, military and economic allies. Everyone has their own interests. Each one of those countries that form the European Union has its own government, and they don't always agree to go along with whatever policy the United States dictates. That's not the case in China, where China, there's only one government and it tells the people what to do, okay? And you can see the difference in population. China has 1.4 billion people, and all these others put together, this confederation doesn't even reach a billion. And so the question is whether not only that you have fewer population, but you have also the fact that they're not united. They're not completely united in their efforts against China. Right now, they have a military and economic superiority, and the question is, how long is that going to last? Okay, is China coming up to speed, becoming mightier? It's got money, for example, to spend in Africa. It's also intervening in some countries in the Americas, like Venezuela and Cuba. So it's trying to expand its empire as well. And the question is, will the United States at some point have to provoke a war, most likely because of Taiwan, in order to stop China's growth and create an incident that will lead to war? Okay, so these are things that you have to think about, and one of those is that whether Europe will go along with such a war. Like, they might follow the United States at some point, but at some point they're going to stop and say, well, we're not going to cross this line. Okay? And I more or less put those countries down on the bottom according to their population. That's why Canada is so small, because Canada only has 38 million people. And Australia, it's got only 26 million people. China has 1.4 billion people. So there's a big difference between the population of these countries. Okay? So keep all that in mind for any future reference. It's good to have a notion of, first, the population, and then the fact that China really has a single government for 1.4 billion people. That's not the case for the West. The West is a confederation. And if the U.S. Civil War serves as an indicator, we know what happened to the Confederation. It broke apart. Okay? So, I don't know. These are things that you got to ponder. Okay, here are just another version or vision of this. It's, again, the alliances. Okay, and you see the political, economic, military alliances that have been taking place. Everybody's, moving their pawns on the chessboard. One guy moves it this way, the other guy moves it that way. And these are just very general, hot spots that are out there. There are obviously more alliances than this, okay? But this just gives you a little snapshot, okay, quick snapshot of how the alignments are taking place. And the question is whether these two groups are going to come and clash at some point in time. Okay, things for you to ponder. Will there be war? Okay. Is there any other way to stop China? China is still growing like 5 or 6%. The United States, not even close. It's maybe 1 or 2%. I don't even know if it's growing at all. The other thing is that the United States is growing also its services. It's not growing any real manufacturing, let alone agriculture. And, again, I like to distinguish those because real stuff is the tangible stuff in the case of economics. When you construct bridges, when you construct streets, cars, airplanes, houses, highways, even fields that you plant, all that's tangible, and that's a measure of wealth. All this services stuff, that's all abstract, and all we're doing is moving money around. We're not really creating anything new until that money somehow goes into manufacturing or into agriculture where something tangible is produced. Okay, so until something tangible is produced, all you did was move money around. Okay, And so I say that services is unemployment, masked unemployment, and I say that services is misleading. You know, when you grow in services, and all the economies in the West are trying to, not only are already in the service mode, 85% of their economies are services. What is that? You know, what have they constructed? What have they made that is real? Okay? And the issue is nothing. Services is not real economy. Okay? It's a masked economy. Okay, here we have another fellow says, it's not Marxism that is going to blow up. It's conservative or right-wing socialism, what's called the Nazbol ideology. Okay, I guess the ball for the Bolsheviks. Okay, and yeah, it's like the ultra-right and the ultra-left somehow shake hands or have a meeting of the minds. Okay, that's, I guess, what he's suggesting. Fascists and Marxists are starting to realize that there's a connection between private interests and cultural liberalism. While it's true that Marxists have supported egalitarianism, so have the capitalists. Okay, capitalists love mass migration, LGBT, feminism, and individualism. Okay, these are, again, political comments. What we try to do here is to relate this stuff to extinction. We're interested in extinction, not just in politics. We bring politics, economics, military issues only in the context of, you know, extinction. So try to keep it within the context of this channel. Okay, we don't do politics here, or do as little as we can possibly manage. We're interested in the issue of extinction, how all these different branches of our society eventually end up affecting or accelerating or decelerating extinction, the process of extinction. Okay, fellow says, enemies cooperate. Okay, he says, you claim enemies can't cooperate. Yeah, I say they don't. They do under certain circumstances. I guess that's what he's going to refer to here. Once a state of mutually assured destruction exists between nations, why do they cooperate to limit the size of nuclear arsenals and allow mutual overflight rights? Okay, good point. Answer, to make things mutually better rather than worse. If they all benefit, they will all cooperate. Okay, so fellows suggesting that the Russians, the Chinese, especially those two countries, and the United States, you know, at the top levels, they shake hands. You know, down at the bottom, they don't care. They say, you know, let people think whatever they want. And we at the top, we all agree we're all part of the same club, so to speak, right? So that they're not really enemies at the top. And all I'm going to clarify there is that, you know, you keep in mind, like World War I, you had Wilhelm the First of Germany, the second, I think it was the second, and he was a cousin of the British guy, right, of George. And, you know, they were all, in fact, family, extended family. And, you know, they did visit each other, and they sent letters to each other. And yet there was what we call World War I. There was a fighting between all these countries, the military of one country fighting against the military of another country, even though the people at the top shook hands. Okay, so keep that in mind. The fact that people shake hands at the top does not mean that the military of those countries and the economic forces, political as well, right, do not try to create some incident because of interests that does not concern really the people who rule. It's other people also who have interests and move their pawns in such a way that it creates a situation irrespective of what the people at the top think, okay, or can do. I'm not sure all these emperors that we have today, you know, the emperor in the United States, the emperor in Russia, the emperor in China, all these emperors, you know, they have limited power because there's other people who also have interests within those countries, and those interests don't always match. Okay, so to treat this as a monolithic thing up at the top, saying all the people here in China at the top agree with all the people at the top in the United States, agree with everyone on the top in Russia, that's where I have a difference with them. Okay. Anyways, he said, we're assuming the heads of state really are enemies. I think it's the other way around. They could be friends, but the enemies are the people immediately under them where the power is distributed. Okay, so you have the military over here, the politicians over there who might even hate the emperor, you know, whoever's the emperor at the time. And, you know, those people move their forces irrespective of what the head of state really believes or wants to do. Okay. And aren't cooperating to maintain the illusion of being enemies. Okay? Fear of invasion can justify control over the masses and a hierarchy of wealth power. Okay? And all I can say is a little anecdote that I've got from Cuba. When I was in Cuba, they told me a little saying they have, and they said that they say that they call the meat, the meat is very scarce on the island, even to this day, and it doesn't come very often. It comes like every 6 months or whatever. And so people, just pray and hope that maybe meat will come someday, right? And so they call the meat the Yankees. You say, why do you call them the Yankees? Well, because the government always tells us they're coming, they're almost here, and we never see them. So that's more or less what this guy says as well. They say, look, there's an enemy out there. We have to be strong and whatever. And people say, oh, yeah, let's all work together because there's going to be this invasion, and the invasion never comes. And so, yeah, in that sense, he's right. The masses are manipulated, and there's not much the masses can do because they have no ruling power. Okay? No real power. So, yeah, we have to be careful about all that. Okay, here's fellow says, changing a little bit the subject here, the problem with equality between men and women is that it always starts with a white male standard. Women are just as strong as men. Blacks are just as good as whites. But there is no reason to buy into this standard in the first place. Okay. All I can say is, some people are, like I mentioned the other day, last time, is that, especially some men, they're worried about women catching up. It's like, women belong in the kitchen, kind of Taliban sort of thing. And so, I like to point out a situation, and that situation is that, you have women out there who are into very heavy sports like wrestling and weightlifting and so on, which have traditionally been almost uniquely for men. And now we have women going into those sports. Women play soccer. I think they play American football. I don't know. I don't watch female American football. I do watch American football with men. Okay, but the question is, that I said remove the sex issue, make it all unisex, make everybody compete against everybody else. Okay, and so women eventually will have to come up to par with the best men, and maybe they will come up to par with the best men. And it won't be an issue whether they have testosterone or estrogen. Maybe that's not the deciding factor. Maybe it's the fact that women have been kept by men down for so many years. They did there was this division of labor. They were in the kitchen, men were out hunting, and that's changed quite a bit. Today there's very little difference between what women do and what men do. And as time goes by, maybe there won't be any difference in the quality and the quantity and the records that we set. Maybe females run faster than men in the end. If we give them enough time, not only will they catch up, maybe they even pass us. And we're long gone from the days where you had the Huns or the hordes from the east, Genghis Khan, and they would sweep through little villages, kill the men, rape the women, take their children as slaves, that sort of thing. And that's a long time ago. I mean, we can only see that in history and in the movies. And these days, you don't really see that like it happened in those days. And I got a little anecdote here just to show you that how men used to, or how many men think of these things. And it goes to this fellow from the Bible, okay, Abimelech, and it's in Judges. It says, "And certain women cast a piece of a millstone upon Abimelech's head, and all to break his skull. And then he called hastily unto the young man, his armor bearer, and said unto him, Draw thy sword and slay me. That men say not of me, a woman slew him." And his young man thrust him through, and he died. It was very embarrassing for a man to be killed by a woman. So the guy said, no, just before I die, you kill me. And that's more or less what's in the mind of a lot of these folks out there. They think it's an issue of women catching up, and they being embarrassed by the fact that a woman is just as good or even better than them. And they've got some problem with that, obviously. Okay, and all I'm saying is, you take a wrestler like maybe Ronda Rousey. I'm sure she could beat up a lot of men out there, even heavier than and bigger than she is, because she's a trained martial arts fighter. Okay, she's been doing that since she was a little kid. Okay, and so that's reality, and you have to kind of bow down to reality. Reality is reality. And then, just in case as a reference, you'll see that there are animals such as the hyena, where the female is bigger and mightier than the males. And they have their harem. Really, it's not a harem, it's a matriarchy, right? All these females go around, and the male has to come in and ask for permission, to do his thing, and then he's got to leave. And if he doesn't leave, well, he's in trouble with a big female of the clan, because it's a clan run by females. Elephant's the same thing, except the elephant male is bigger than the elephant female, but he's a loner. And it's when you see several elephants, they're all female. They're all female, and they have their kids there. When the kids grow a little too big, if they're male, they got to leave the clan. So I think also the spiders, the black widow. You have in the animal world, there are cases where the females are stronger and bigger than the males. And I never asked any of those animals they have estrogen or testosterone. Okay, but yeah, it's not always the case where a male is bigger. We do have this dimorphism under all kinds of monkeys, apes, and so on. But the question is, are we an exception where females are catching up and eventually will become bigger and stronger than men? I know a lot of people shudder at the thought. A lot of men. Okay, let's continue here. Fellow says, after singles comes cloning. Because I said, okay, we went from these group sex that we had in the hunter gathering days, maybe for almost 200,000 years. Then we went into agriculture, where we invented this patriarchy, where the male was the head of the household. He could do anything with anyone in the household. He was also responsible for them. Like if one of your kids did something to your neighbor, you were responsible for that, and so on down the line. Okay, and you also had to defend them. Like if your neighbor raped your slave girl, maybe you did something about it, and you took that up with the council or whatever. So you were responsible. Okay, and that was kind of like what the patriarchy was all about. Then we went into the nuclear family, in the manufacturing age. And today we're in the service economy, and what we have, singles, bachelors. Most people just have maybe casual sex and then separate after length of time, maybe 3-4 years, and they separate. Each one goes his own way, and there is no family, no real family. There's no kids. Maybe there's one kid here and there, spends time with the mother, maybe with the father, but it's really a singles society. We're moving into a single society. We're abandoning the nuclear family right now. It's dying. Okay, so the fellow says, well, the next step is, cloning. Maybe do some test tube baby stuff. Women get their kicks at the sperm bank. Men hire some tummy out there to do their job for them. Okay. Yeah, it's a weird society. Now we're really into weird things to have what Mother Nature said. Look, it's very simple. You just get together with a woman. You can have a baby. You can have many with her. Maybe have many with several women. And that's dying, because many of women don't want to have babies anymore, especially if there's no long-term relationship. Okay? And so the singles is destroying the birth of new children. Someone might have a kid here and there, but in general, the people who are still populating the earth are those people who are living in the nuclear age, and they're still having kids out there. But again, it's like I say, it's got to do with moving to the cities. Once you move to the cities, kids are out. Okay, no more kids. You can't have 10 kids in an apartment like we used to have 10 kids in the farms. Okay, that's changed for several reasons. Okay, and I do want to add one more time that it was the rich who used to have kids. Everybody associates having children with poor people. Not true. Not completely true. To some degree it is true. But in the old days it was like this. It was the filthy rich who had kids. Okay, in the 19th century they had big families. And there was no problem with having kids. It was a different culture. It had to do with other reasons, social and economic. And here's a graph that really puts this in context, okay? Let me show you this. And here it is, okay? Let me get back in here. And who had children in the 19th century? Well, it wasn't the Africans, okay? It was the white Anglo-Saxons, people like me. We had children in the 19th century. Well, I have children, but I have 3 boys. But so I did my duty for the fatherland, okay? But it was the white folk, Europe and the Americas, they had children, and because they were countries that were coming up, and primarily in the north. And they were building cities, and those cities were manufacturing centers. That's why population increased drastically in Europe and in the United States, especially during the 19th century, because these were economies that were expanding, okay, and they were feeding, one fed the other. as people moved to the cities that were not yet cities, they were growing cities. There was manufacturing, there was economics. People still had kids. They had the agriculture mentality still. So they were coming in there, having children. There was room for children. They had houses, not apartments. Okay, nobody had apartments in the 19th century. It was all houses. And so it was still more or less rural. So rural mentality and rural society. And so that's when the population increased. And who were the Europeans and the Americans? They were the rich people who were expanding. And by rich, I mean, wealthier than people in Africa. Who were the Africans? Well, they were the ones that were, kidnapped as slaves and taken to work in the fields. They were living in a different era in many African countries. They were in the tribal world. They were still hunter-gatherers. And you can't have children in a hunter-gathering societies, not many, because you don't have enough resources to support them. The Neanderthals, they were always a small population because they were hunter-gatherers. And when Cro-Magnon came into Europe, he had small populations because, again, it's a hunter-gathering society does not allow for billions of people. Okay? And hopefully you can understand that. It's when you go into agriculture and then manufacturing, and that transition, that's when you start having children by the tons. Especially if you've conquered endemic diseases, which usually comes in parallel with that, because now you look at your standard of living, what kind of environment you have. You start cleaning the rivers, you start coming in contact with diseases, so you study them, you find out how to kill those diseases, how to defend yourself against them, and once you conquer them, well, now you can live, more people can live longer because of that. Okay, so it's all part of the same deal. But that's why the population increased in Europe, because essentially what happened in Europe was the wealthy countries were having children. And they were having children because they had a rural mentality. The cities were still rural in many ways. They had houses, not apartments. And then there was work. So there was economics. There was hope for the future. And so they had children. And they were still not covered by Social Security. Social Security comes, I think it was Otto von Bismarck who was the first one to implement Social Security, retirement. And that was around 1870, the time of the German-French War. So that's when Social Security comes around. Before then, you had this population expansion in part because the kids had to take care of their parents. There was no Social Security. And you had something to bequeath to them. So all these things kind of work together to increase the population of Europe and the United States. What happened later on? Well, you can see it kind of leveled off, and now Europe, if anything, is in many parts in kind of negative growth. It's not producing the number of children it should produce. It's not negative growth in the sense that the total population is decreasing, but the rate is what's falling. Okay? In that sense, you have to be careful that if the rate falls and falls below zero, well, then you have a negative growth, and now your total population starts decreasing. What happened to Africa? Well, it was after 1950s that Africans started having 7, 8, 9, 10 children. Why? Because, again, they went from hunter-gatherers, from being colonized, to countries that slowly gained their independence until around 1960s. And that's when they started having cities coming, into the civilized world, if we're going to call it that. That's when they started having kids. They went in that transition from hunter-gathering to agriculture and manufacturing and creating cities. Okay, so those trends give you an idea that the rich people did have children. Okay, and by rich I mean middle class people who could afford to have children. Had nothing really to do with money. It had to do more with the transition from hunter-gathering to agriculture, from agriculture to manufacturing. We stopped having children when we started having services. Okay? Services killed the family, and part of that has to do with, again, the fact that we built apartments instead of houses. And the cities became mega cities. We have millions of people in some cities, 20 million, 25 million today. Those are big antholes. You can't have many children in an anthole. Okay, not the same rate as you had them in the farms. Okay, here's last issue. It's got to do with the definition of life. Fellow says, life is defined as any atomic system capable of performing functions such as eating, metabolizing, excreting, breathing, moving, growing, reproducing, responding to external stimuli. But see, if we look at the Wikipedia, in fact, you'll see this many places. I just put wiki as a main reference. There's currently no consensus regarding the definition of life. These are not, this whole thing here that this fellow put is not the definition of life. With this mechanism, this definition, we cannot tell. Not a single biologist can tell you whether a virus is alive or just a molecule, an inert molecule. And you know whether the cell is the first living entity. I guess everybody agrees, but nobody can tell you why. And you know, not everything that moves breathes. Not everything that breathes reproduces. You know, which is what I mentioned the other day, that the biologists essentially look at reproduction only. Out of all those, it looks at number 7, and that's it. Does it reproduce or doesn't it reproduce? And I keep saying, you know, my great grandmother, she doesn't reproduce after the age of 60, you know, and so does that mean after the age of 60 she's no longer alive because she doesn't reproduce or is capable of reproducing? A woman that could not reproduce, she's dead, you know, she's inert. So no, it's a bad definition when you have to include all these capabilities, all these processes, because not all living entities follow all of these. Okay, and if you follow 3 and you don't follow 4 of them, you know, what does that say about the definition? You need a definition that you can use universally. And that's why we have our definition here. And once again, alive, living, a natural object that moves against the path of least resistance, essentially, right? A living being that has the ability to move against gravity. And life is just a group of living beings. So if you're alive, living, means you move by yourself against the path of least resistance, primarily gravity. And if you can do that, well, then you're alive. And a group of living entities then is what we call life. Okay. So is there life on this planet? Well, yes, it is, but it's not in rocks. Why? Because rocks cannot move by themselves against gravity. And it's got to be essentially you know, we exclude all entities made by man. Okay, a little toy airplane, a little balloon that floats in the air, moves against gravity. Yeah, it doesn't count. It's got to be a natural entity, not one made by man. And a lot of people have problems with that, but then they miss the point, because the point here is not to play devil's advocate for the sake of playing devil's advocate. We don't define just for the sake of it. We define so that we have a useful, so we can use the definition. Okay, and so you can say, well, what if we include all the artificial stuff that man makes? You know, a robot that walks up a mountain. Well, yeah, we made it, and is that thing alive? Well, you know, you can include all artificial entities. What is the point of including within the word alive or living artificial entities? Do you have a purpose for that? We're not defining for just for the sake of defining. We're defining so that we can use the word. Okay, in biology. Biology does not study robots. Okay, biology studies living entities. We need to know what a living entity is, and we're giving you a definition. Anything that moves by itself against gravity, essentially. And that does not include, you know, unnatural objects, artificial objects. It only includes natural objects. Then we can use it in biology. We can't use pixels. We can't use airplanes, balloons, robots, little toy trucks. We can't use any of those in biology. Okay? So that's the bottom line. We're trying to define it for the purposes of biology.